You have probably eaten something today without knowing where it really came from. Maybe it was pulled from a pit in someone's backyard, scooped from a cast iron pan seasoned by decades of use, or poured warm over a plate that could not wait. And if you live anywhere near the South, there is a real chance that food traces its roots back to Tennessee, and more specifically, to the black hands, black minds, and black culture that built this state's culinary identity from the ground up. Tennessee gets a lot of credit. Nashville gets called a food city. Barbecue joints get written up in national magazines. Hot chicken has gone global. But somewhere between the glossy travel pieces and the celebrity chef features, a critical part of the story gets lost. The people who actually created these foods, who perfected the techniques, who passed the recipes down through generations of hardship and genius, rarely get the headline. That ends today. In this video, we are talking about 10 foods that black people in Tennessee did not just cook. They invented, shaped, and gave to the world. Some of these you will recognize immediately. Some will genuinely surprise you. All of them will change the way you think about your plate. Stay until the end, because the last entry might be the most important food story this state has ever produced. Subscribe right now if you care about food, history done right. This is where the real stories live. Number 10. Crackling cornbread. Before there was cornbread as you know it, before the mix in the blue box and the version served in restaurant baskets, there was crackling cornbread. And it came from enslaved black communities in rural Tennessee, where nothing was wasted and everything was transformed into something magnificent through necessity and skill. Cracklings are the crispy remnants left after hog fat is rendered down for long. When you cook pork fat low and slow until the moisture evaporates and the skin turns golden and crunchy and savory, what remains are cracklings. For enslaved people in Tennessee who were given the least desirable cuts of the animal, these crispy pork remnants were not a garnish. They were a protein source, a fat source, and when folded into coarse ground cornmeal batter and poured into a hot cast iron skillet, they became something extraordinary. The cracklings melted slightly into the cornbread as it baked, releasing pork fat into the batter itself, creating a bread that was crispy on the outside, rich and dense in the center, and shot through with pockets of intense savory flavor. There was nothing else like it. There is still nothing else like it. What black cooks in Tennessee understood, that no cookbook of that era ever captured, was the chemistry of fat in bread. They knew that rendered pork fat carried flavor differently than butter, that cracklings added texture you could not replicate any other way, and that a cornbread, baked in a well-seasoned cast iron pan, did not need anything else on top. It was a complete food in itself. Food historians trace the method back to enslaved kitchens in Middle and West Tennessee, where hog-killing season was a community event, and crackling cornbread was the immediate result of a full day's work. You would render the fat, save the cracklings, mix them into the batter, and eat that bread warm from the fire before sundown. It was sustenance, and it was art at the same time. This technique spread throughout Tennessee and eventually through the entire South. Today, if you ever find crackling cornbread made with fresh rendered hog cracklings folded into a stone ground cornmeal batter cooked in cast iron, you are eating a direct line back to black Tennessee food culture at its most essential. Number 9. Slow-cooked pot liquor greens. The word tells you everything. Pot liquor. The liquid left in the pot after a long braise of collard greens, turnip greens, or mustard greens cooked for hours with smoked pork until the greens are silk and the broth is concentrated into something so deeply flavored and nutritionally dense that black Tennessee communities drank it straight from the pot or sopped it up with cornbread. The bread was the vehicle. The pot liquor was the destination. What black cooks in Tennessee mastered over generations was form of long braising that drew everything out of the greens and the pork simultaneously. The pot would go on low in the morning and would not come off until afternoon. You would start with smoked ham hocks or neck bones, add water, and let that cook until the broth had real body. Then the greens would go in, packed into the pot in layers, and they would cook down from a mountain of raw vegetation into a deeply tender tangle that had absorbed every bit of smoke and salt and fat from the pork. The pot liquor itself was the byproduct. Except black cooks knew it was never a byproduct. It was the point. That liquid contained everything the greens had released during the braise: potassium, calcium, vitamins that would otherwise be lost in shorter cooking. A splash of apple cider vinegar added at the end to cut the richness. A pinch of red pepper flakes for heat. These were not accidents. They were the result of decades of careful tasting by cooks who understood flavor at a level no formal training could have taught. Number 8, sweet potato pie. Let us clear something up. Pumpkin pie is a European-derived recipe that arrived with colonists. Sweet potato pie is a black invention, rooted in West African culinary traditions and brought to full expression by enslaved black cooks in the American South, with Tennessee playing a central role in its development. The sweet potato had deep roots in African cooking. When enslaved people were brought to America, they recognized it as something close to the African yam, a staple from their homelands. They incorporated it into their cooking and developed preparations that reflected their own food traditions rather than simply following European methods. The pie that emerged from Tennessee's black kitchens was not a pumpkin pie with orange flesh substituted in. It was a fundamentally different recipe with its own spice profile and identity. Where pumpkin pie tends toward a cleaner flavor, sweet potato pie built by black Tennessee cooks was richer, more complex, and almost always included the warmth of nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla, with a custard filling that was denser and more flavorful than anything made from pumpkin. The crust, made with lard rather than butter, was flakier and more tender. The combination of a lard crust with a spiced sweet potato custard was entirely the creation of black cooks making culinary genius from the ingredients at hand. Sweet potato pie became a fixture at every significant gathering in black Tennessee life. Church suppers, Emancipation Day celebrations, family reunions, funerals. The pie meant something beyond food. It meant home, survival, and the persistence of culture through every attempt to erase it. Number 7, smothered pork chops. There is a cooking technique that black cooks in Tennessee developed and perfected called smothering, and it is one of the most sophisticated braising methods in American culinary history. To smother something is to sear it first, then cook it slowly in a deeply caramelized onion gravy until the meat is tender and the gravy has become something you would gladly drink straight from the pan. Smothered pork chops are the most iconic expression of this technique. You start with thick bone-in pork chops, season them aggressively with salt, black pepper, garlic, and cayenne. Then sear them in a cast iron pan in hot lard until both sides are deeply brown. Then you remove the chops, cook down sliced onions in the same fat until they are golden and almost jam-like. Add flour to build a roux right there in the pan. Pour in stock, add the chops back in, cover tight, and let everything go low and slow until the pork pulls from the bone with almost no pressure and the gravy is thick and dark and savory. The particular combination of caramelized onion, pork fat, and flour created a gravy that clung to the meat and made even the toughest cut of pork into something genuinely delicious. This technique spread from black Tennessee kitchens into the broader food culture of the state, into diners and small restaurants across Tennessee, where it remains on menus today. The difference between a smothered pork chop made by someone who learned this from their grandmother and one made from an online recipe is immediately obvious to anyone who has eaten the real thing. The real thing has a gravy that tastes like it took all day because it did. That is not a detail. That is the entire lesson. Real cooking cannot be rushed, and the technique black cooks in Tennessee developed with smothered pork chops is proof of that. Number 6, Tennessee hot catfish. Before Nashville hot chicken conquered every fast food chain in the country, there was hot catfish. And the hot catfish tradition in Tennessee is older, deeper, and more specifically rooted in black culture than the chicken version that dominates the conversation today. Black communities along the Tennessee River in West Tennessee had been frying catfish for generations. The catfish was soaked in seasoned buttermilk first, sometimes overnight, to draw out any muddy flavor. Then it was coated in seasoned cornmeal, because cornmeal fried to a crust that was incomparably crunchy and held up to the sauce that was coming. Black cooks were making a cayenne and fat paste and brushing it over freshly fried catfish at Friday night fish fries that were among the most important social events in Black Tennessee communities. These gatherings were church fundraisers, neighborhood institutions, and community anchors. The sauce was made by combining cayenne with hot frying oil, salt, and a bit of sugar. Applied immediately to fish straight from the oil, it created a dish of extraordinary intensity. A thin, crispy cornmeal crust saturated with spiced fat, beneath which the catfish was perfectly moist and flaky. Talk to people whose families have been in West Tennessee for generations, and they will tell you that hot catfish came first. Number 5, chess pie. Chess pie has one of the simplest ingredient lists in Southern baking. Eggs, butter, sugar, a small amount of cornmeal, a splash of vinegar, vanilla. That is essentially it. The result is a custard pie with a filling that is slightly firm on top, almost translucent when cut, and intensely, directly sweet in a way that no other pie quite replicates. The most credible accounts of chess pie's origins trace it to black cooks in the Mid-South, with Tennessee having a strong claim as a central site of its development. The story most often told is that chess pie was the pie black cooks made when the fruit was gone, when the sweet potatoes had run out, when there was nothing left in the larder except eggs, butter, and sugar. It was born of scarcity and turned into something people chose to eat even when other options existed because it was that good. The vinegar balanced what would otherwise be one-dimensional sweetness and helped the custard set properly. The cornmeal added enough structure to give the filling body while contributing a faint graininess that kept each bite interesting. Black cooks in Tennessee made chess pie for the white families they worked for, and those families began requesting it for their own gatherings. That is how the recipe spread into broader Tennessee food culture. But the pie's DNA is black. Number 4, pulled pork barbecue with vinegar slaw. The history of pulled pork barbecue in Tennessee, specifically the tradition of serving it with a vinegar-based slaw on top, is inseparable from the black pitmasters who developed and maintained this tradition across the state for more than a century. The technique of cooking whole hogs or pork shoulders low and slow over a wood fire is West African in origin. Enslaved people in Tennessee brought this knowledge with them and applied it to the pigs that were central to Southern agriculture. The ability to cook collagen-rich pork over many hours until it became soft enough to pull apart by hand required understanding heat, smoke, airflow, moisture, timing, and the behavior of different wood species when burned. Black pitmasters became the keepers of this knowledge. They cooked overnight, feeding the fire, monitoring temperature, knowing by sight and smell when the meat was ready without any thermometer. The vinegar slaw that became the traditional accompaniment in much of Tennessee is also a black contribution. The combination of raw cabbage with a vinegar-forward dressing created a condiment that cut through the richness of pork fat and provided acidity and crunch. Placed on top of pulled pork in a sandwich, it was a complete flavor experience. Sweet smoky pork, tangy slaw, soft bread. Tennessee barbecue's dry rub and vinegar sauce tradition has deep roots in Black pitmaster culture, preserved by families who have run their restaurants and roadside stands for generations. Number 3, banana pudding. Banana pudding, as it exists in Tennessee and across the American South, is a Black creation. The specific architecture of this dessert, the layering of custard, cookies, and bananas into a complete dish greater than the sum of its parts, emerged from Black Southern kitchens and Black Southern food culture. The custard at the center of a proper banana pudding is the key element. It is not instant pudding mix. It is a cooked custard made from egg yolks, milk, sugar, and vanilla, stirred over heat until it reaches the right thickness. This technique, making custard from scratch without curdling the eggs, is a skilled process that Black cooks in Tennessee mastered in the kitchens where they worked and brought back to their own family tables. The layering of vanilla wafers with ripe bananas and homemade custard, often topped with a browned meringue, created a dessert with several textures and flavors that interacted as the pudding sat. Black cooks understood this timing intuitively. They knew to make the pudding hours before serving, to let it sit, to let the flavors develop. This dessert became so central to Black Tennessee food culture that it appears at virtually every significant gathering. What rarely made it into food writing celebrations was an honest acknowledgement of where this dish came from and who made it what it is. Number 2, hot tamales. The hot tamale tradition of the Mississippi Delta, which extends into West Tennessee, is one of the most distinct and historically significant food traditions in the region, and its development in Black communities is well documented by food historians. The theory of how tamales arrived in the Delta involves Black workers who traveled seasonally to the Southwest and Mexico in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and brought the technique back with them. What they brought was then adapted significantly by Black cooks in West Tennessee. The result was a tamale that looked nothing like what you would find in Mexico. It was smaller, more tightly wrapped, cooked in water rather than steamed, and flavored with a spice profile that reflected the Black South rather than Mexico. Tennessee hot tamales were made with a cornmeal masa, seasoned aggressively with cayenne, black pepper, and garlic. The filling is usually beef or pork, similarly spiced. Boiled in seasoned liquid rather than steamed, they had a denser, more yielding texture. When eaten, they were dipped in the liquid they were cooked in, which was itself full of flavor. Street vendors in West Tennessee, many of them Black women, sold these tamales from carts and stands beginning in the early part of the 20th century. They were cheap, filling, portable, and intensely satisfying. A staple of Black working-class food culture that the Southern Foodways Alliance has recognized as one of the great distinctive food traditions of the American South. Number 1, Nashville hot chicken. Of all the foods on this list, Nashville hot chicken is the one most people have heard of. It is on fast food menus in countries that are not the United States. It has been the subject of magazine cover stories, documentary segments, and international food tourism. It has arguably become the most globally recognized regional food product Tennessee has ever produced, and it was created by a Black family. Specifically, the family of Andre Prince Jeffries, whose grandfather Thornton Prince is the figure at the center of this dish's origin. The story goes like this. Sometime in the 1930s, Thornton Prince came home late one night and his girlfriend, furious at his absence, decided to punish him by cooking his fried chicken with far more cayenne pepper than usual, intending to make it inedible. Instead, he loved it. He developed the recipe further and eventually opened a restaurant called BBQ Chicken Shack, which later became Prince's Hot Chicken Shack, which still exists today on Ewing Drive in Nashville, still run by members of his family, still making hot chicken essentially the way it was made in the beginning. The technique is specific. The chicken is marinated in seasoned buttermilk, then fried in lard until the crust is set and deeply crispy. Immediately after coming out of the oil, the chicken is painted with a paste made from cayenne combined with a portion of the hot frying lard, black pepper, and sugar. The hot oil carries the cayenne into the crust and blooms the spice, activating its heat and flavor simultaneously. The result is fried chicken that is fiery in a way that builds rather than hitting all at once, simultaneously crunchy and deeply seasoned. The traditional service is on a slice of white bread with pickle chips on top. The bread absorbs the spiced fat that drips from the chicken during eating and becomes its own flavored food by the end of the meal. The pickles provide acidity and crunch that cut through the richness of the fat. This combination is not casual. It is a considered serving method that was part of the dish from the beginning. For decades, Nashville hot chicken was almost entirely a black food in a black part of Nashville. Prince's Hot Chicken Shack operated in North Nashville, in a neighborhood that was and remains predominantly black, and its customer base was primarily the black community. The dish was beloved but local and specific. The broader food world discovered hot chicken in the early 2000s, and the subsequent decades saw the dish spread rapidly. National chains began developing hot chicken products. Food media descended on Nashville specifically to write about it. Tourism around hot chicken became a measurable economic force. Through all of this, Andre Prince Jeffries kept making hot chicken at Prince's. She kept it the same. She did not compromise the recipe for volume or visibility or the demands of the trend her family had started. She became one of the most important figures in American food history, the keeper of the original, the person whose family created something that changed American food culture and who maintained its integrity while the world transformed it into something else entirely. If you eat Nashville hot chicken today, anywhere in the world, what you are eating is a food that traces directly back to a black family in Tennessee, to Thornton Prince's kitchen in the 1930s, to Andre Prince Jeffries' hands today. That lineage is not a historical footnote. It is the entire story, and it deserves to be told completely, without abbreviation, every single time. There it is. 10 foods, 10 stories, 10 contributions to American food culture that began in Black Tennessee and shaped what people eat across this country and beyond its borders. Go look at what is on your dinner table tonight. Think about where the techniques and flavors on your plate actually came from, because American food is black food at its foundation, and Tennessee is one of the places where that foundation was poured. These 10 foods are the proof. Drop a comment telling us which of these you have eaten and whether you knew where it actually came from. Let us see how many of you already knew this history and how many are learning it today for the first time. Both answers are welcome here. Because either way, knowing the truth matters. The people who invented these foods deserve to be named, remembered, and credited. That is not a small thing. Subscribe so you never miss the real stories behind the food on your table. More coming soon. We have deep dives into Black culinary history, food origin stories that got buried, and the men and women who fed America without ever getting the credit they were owed. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay hungry, stay sharp, and keep rising.